Hey everyone, welcome back to On the Stand with Ashish Arun. On today's episode, I'm thrilled to welcome Maria Babinetz, a highly respected expert in vocational rehabilitation and an incoming president of the American Board of Vocational Experts. With over 3 decades of experience, Maria has not only honed her expertise in areas like workers' compensation and personal injury cases, but has also become a trusted voice for vocational experts in the courtroom. Her contributions to the field go beyond casework. She's a mentor, leader, and educator. Maria, welcome to On the Stand.
Ashish, good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm happy to be here and excited to discuss with you an area that I really feel very passionate about, which is the area of vocational rehabilitation and the world of work and people with disabilities and some other areas of expert witness work.
Yeah, so let's start from the beginning. At what point in your career did you decide that, okay, you wanted to get into the field of vocational rehabilitation and then eventually getting into expert witness work?
Well, I kind of had an interesting trajectory, Ashish, at least what I consider to be interesting. I was introduced to the concept of the disability system at a very early age, really without realizing it. At the age of 10, my dad, who was a welder by trade, suffered a brain aneurysm. And as a result of that, he suffered a stroke and he had to undergo surgery. And in a post-surgery situation, he had to go through multiple therapy modalities in terms of like physical therapy, occupational therapy. And he did that. But in all of that, he became aphasic, meaning he really lost the ability to communicate. And he was paralyzed on the left side. And when I mentioned that he was a welder, he was in the 1970s, he had suffered an industrial injury. And on his dominant side, he lost 2 digits, essentially, his middle finger and his ring finger. So you really need that to be a welder. Yeah. Back then, when you compare it to the availability of different types of modalities and treatment, the multidisciplinary approach for rehabilitation, physical rehabilitation and occupational therapy rehabilitation to kind of maximize potential. And I'm not saying it wasn't available then, just there's been so many advances since then. But he went back to work very quickly and he did go back to work, but then he suffered this stroke and he just was not able to ever transition back to work. And I saw at the time moving through that disability system because he was never able to return to work. So I saw that impression that really did leave a very lasting impression on me because he was the primary breadwinner in the family. And, fast forward, I go to college and my dad passed away at the end of my sophomore year in college. So I go through Penn State and I get my degree in individual and family studies, which is a wonderful experience. And that degree is really an appreciation for studying human development over the lifespan. And during that experience academically, I had some friends who had gone through the University of Scranton through their program at a graduate level in rehabilitation counseling. That was very interesting to me because I knew I wanted to advance my academic career. So I looked into it and I ended up going to the University of Scranton and I studied rehabilitation counseling. And it was through that experience, I learned more about the area of vocational rehabilitation. And rehabilitation counseling is a very unique area or niche area. And part of that curriculum required doing an internship. And essentially, the internship is such that you could do either public sector rehab or private sector rehab. And at the time, I was living down in the Philadelphia suburban area, and I was commuting back and forth as a graduate student up and down the Pennsylvania Turnpike a couple of times a week. And when the internship became available, there was a private sector rehab company in the Valley Forge area, and that's where I did my internship. And so I had a what I would consider to be an atypical trajectory into the world of expert witness work. Now, I started doing case management, but I was also exposed to litigation work very early on. So when that kind of entrance, I saw a peek behind the curtain, I would refer to it as,
Mhm.
really what the value is in bringing that type of skill set to that environment. Because public sector rehab and private sector are very different entities, I would say. They're very different systems. And essentially, I really had a passion, and I think this did not crystallize for me. It really took some time to be able to understand and appreciate the experience I had in my childhood, not really understanding that, but it really conceptually came together for me. And that's where I really kind of understood, at least for me, the value of work and really what it means to people. And I came to understand that there is value in all work. And as I started to do expert witness work, upon my graduation from the University of Scranton, I accepted a position at a private rehab company and did case management and expert witness work really since the beginning of my career. And it just has gone into many different areas, such as, to speak to your question, areas such as workers' compensation.
Yep.
And I don't do that so much anymore, but there is definitely a place in that. At least it varies by state, each state is specific, but
Mhm.
in Pennsylvania, it speaks to earning power assessment or labor market surveys for an injured worker. And then my practice is very broad in the sense that it speaks to like personal injury, medical malpractice, employment law, wrongful death, child
Yeah.
cases. I do plaintiff defense, things of that nature. So
Mm.
really, my entrance into the field is broad based, but I think it started at an early age, just not knowing it at the time.
Okay. So, like you mentioned, that you don't do workers' compensation that much, but you do a lot of medical malpractice, personal injury, and those sorts of cases. So, how does your approach change based on the type of case you have? It's rehabilitation counseling at the end of the day, but is there a difference in the approach depending on the nature of the case and the nature of the injury?
Well, I think what you have to understand is that my reference earlier in my answer to you, in the sense that there are two different segments. Like you can have like public sector rehabilitation where you're actually providing services to someone who might have a disability, whether it be physical or mental, like a disability or impairment, where you're providing direct services to that individual. You're actually establishing like a client counselor relationship.
Mhm.
That is very different than where you're providing an expert opinion in a litigation setting. There is no client in there. In fact, there has been a white paper that was put out by some colleagues. It was a white paper, and it's been endorsed by some of the professional organizations such as the International Association of Rehabilitation Professionals and the American Board of Vocational Experts, where there is no quote unquote client when you're giving expert opinion, testimony, or evaluation types of services in that type of setting, so that there can be a differentiation made, because there is a different obligation. Because when you're providing services to an individual, there is like confidentiality, and
Yeah.
there is an expectation that the person who you're providing services to has the ability to participate or not participate in those services. Different in the world of litigation, where there is a little bit different of a focus. So that's how I would address what you've asked.
So, what are some of the key qualities that you think a person should have if they are looking to step out of only doing vocational rehabilitation for a client and step into the world of doing expert witness testimony?
Boy, that's a loaded question. So I think there's a lot of different qualities. I think you have to really, I think, first and foremost, know what type of expert that you want to be. I do plaintiff work and I do defense work, and that's just something that I'm comfortable doing. I
Mhm.
think it's important to be balanced, but you also can't control who calls you. So I do think that it's important to strive to do both sides, so to speak. However, I do have colleagues that do only defense. and I have colleagues that only do plaintiff work. I think it is a comfort level, and I certainly have a great deal of respect for colleagues who choose to operate within their practice based on their own decisions and business model. But I think it really starts with knowing the type of expert that you want to be. So that would probably be the first thing that I would recommend to someone who is looking to maybe enter this field. The other thing I would say is that I think it's very important to maintain a consistent methodology. I think when, someone tries to, if they are doing plaintiff, if they try to take a different approach to the way they're handling a case, and then when they're a defense expert, do a different way to handle it, they can run into problems. And I think you have to know the jurisdiction or the venue. You have to know if you're in a Daubert jurisdiction versus a Fry jurisdiction. Communication with the attorney who's hiring you. You have to know if you're going to be dealing with the associate or the partner, the paralegal, who's going to kind of provide you the documents. Things of that nature, I think, are all key, at least to get the ball rolling.
And yeah, I mean, it's a multifaceted, field, and you have to be a professional, you have to be the expert. There's a lot of coordination. So, I mean, I can understand, and these qualities are really important. On the question of, you touched upon the fact that some experts prefer doing plaintiff work and some prefer doing defense work. So, is that something that you see a lot within vocational rehabilitation experts? Because we talk about this with a lot of experts, and many would say that they prefer to have a balance between plaintiff and defense work. So, have you come across a scenario where this has been an issue, where an attorney, when they are making a selection, they have a preference that, okay, I'm a plaintiff's attorney, I only want somebody who does plaintiff's work? Or do you see people looking for some experts with a more balanced spread?
I think just like attorneys do their due diligence, I think it's incumbent upon an expert witness, whether they're a vocational expert, an economic expert, whatever area of expertise. Now, this is just my opinion. I've been practicing over 35 years, soon to be 36. Time passes very quickly, Ashish. And what I've learned over time, we're all works in progress, and you don't start off knowing everything. And I certainly don't know everything, and I'm always learning. But what I've come to understand is that just like attorneys kind of interview experts, I think you have to be very selective in who you choose to work for. And I think you have to ask the key questions. Like, for example, attorneys may say, I'm looking for this type of expert, but also that is based on the types of questions that an expert may ask an attorney. You want to know the deadlines. You want to know the jurisdiction. You want to know the theme of the case, but you also want to know some other critical pieces, because you may not want to get involved in a case that is not within your area of expertise. Like, you want to know your boundaries, and you have to be able to say no, and no is a complete sentence, and that's okay. And I think what we have to understand also is that, and this is not like, very respectfully, I'm saying this is like not to be difficult. You are there to, and I think what I'd like to stress here is that whatever side you're working on, whether you're plaintiff retained or, defense retained, each of those attorneys are advocating for the parties that they're representing, right? But they are not the expert's quote unquote attorney. The expert, it's not their quote unquote case. In my opinion, the vocational expert, they're advocating for their opinion. Yeah. And that is the difference in expert witness work from my perspective. I'm advocating for my opinion. And I have had situations where I have been retained. I'm self-employed, and my business is primarily litigation based, hired by defense attorneys. I'm hired by plaintiff attorneys. I do work in multiple states. And what I would say is that you have to be able to be comfortable being able to know, and you don't know what your opinion is at the time that you accept a referral. And you might be able to go through your whole process and not be able to offer an opinion. And that does happen. And sometimes attorneys are not happy. However, they do appreciate candor and they want to know the truth. In my opinion, And in my experience, attorneys appreciate knowing what you think. They would rather know sooner rather than later what they're dealing with, because they're hiring you for your expertise.
Yeah.
And if they didn't need you, they wouldn't be hiring you. And I would also say that beware if an attorney tries to tell you what to say. Now, I haven't had too many of those experiences, but I have told attorneys I will not be told or directed in terms of how my opinion is developed or what it's going to say. And I have stepped back from those engagements because at the end of the day, credibility matters. And in my estimation, that can end an expert witness career very, very quickly.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question, but you already answered it. That, like, I really wanted to ask that: do attorneys try to enforce their opinion and guide you towards? Because this is something that we have heard from a lot of experts, that a lot of attorneys, if they don't like your opinion, they really try to coast you and push you into signing off on an opinion that they want. And I really think that that actually would do them more damage if, as an expert, you agree to an attorney's or you get influenced by an attorney's position, even if you don't agree with them. You also touched upon the importance of learning, and you mentioned that you like, even after a career of 35 years, you are learning every day. And on the aspect of learning, I wanted to ask you that you've been a member of the American Board of Vocational Experts, and you're going to be the next president. So first of all, congratulations for that. And can you tell me what advantage would an expert have when they join a professional association like the ABVE?
Well, I think that associations and credentials are important. I belong to a number of professional organizations. I've had some leadership positions. I've belonged to the International Association of Rehabilitation Professionals, or IARP. I've belonged to the American Board of Vocational Experts. And, I've had incremental roles in both of them. And I served on the board on ABVE. And I started off in a board position, or I started off in like a peer review position and kind of worked my way up. And I was asked to be president-elect, and I took 6 months to think about it because I was doing some other things. And I took it seriously because it's a 6-year commitment. I really believe in the mission of the organization. So I'm presently in that role, and I will assume the presidency in March of 25 at the annual conference. And I do think that it is an opportunity to give back. This organization promotes credentialing, and it is a credentialing body for board certification and also a testing certification, IPEC. So I think that it gives vocational experts and individuals who qualify for the IPEC credential an opportunity to have a place to go that sets them at least to demonstrate competency for areas that are valuable to attorneys with respect to other individuals who may not choose to pursue certification. Now, listen, it doesn't mean that you can't do expert witness work, but I do think it sets you in a different classification. And there's other, credentials that you can have that also fall into that category. So I think that, and it also helps you kind of collaborate with peers and things like that. So it's been a great experience. And I'm very proud to be associated.
Mm-hmm. So if I am a vocational expert and I don't have any of these credentials till now, and I want to get into vocational expert work, according to you, which should be the first credential I should aim to get?
Well, I think I mentioned a couple of the organizations that you can look into. CRC is a very, I feel like that's a very good credential. And some of the credentials that I have are very common in the field, like a CRC. But some of them do require like experience and educational requirements. So what I would suggest is somebody is interested that, look at some of the organizations that I mentioned in my earlier responses and just look to see what those organizations are about. and see if there's any alignment, and start there. And look at some of those certifications like the CRC to see if people will be interested in pursuing that type of activity to become certified.
So, in your earlier response, you also talked about the importance of knowing the jurisdiction you're working in. Like, is it a Daubert jurisdiction or a FRI jurisdiction? What other rules are applicable in a particular state where you're working in? What level, what depth of legal understanding should an expert have, according to you, of these laws and these rules, like Rule 702 and the Daubert standard and the FRI standard? And if they have a confusion about any of these standards, then is there a resource that you would point them to, or should they ask their attorneys if they are not sure about the jurisdictions? What's your advice on that?
Well, I think what I said earlier is that an expert witness, irrespective of their area of expertise, has to realize that they don't have an Esquire after their name, right? We have to stay in our own lane and really kind of not go outside of where we're able to give an expert opinion, so that when we are working on a case, I think the idea of communication is critical. You want to understand the jurisdiction because it does vary. And you want to understand that if a case is going to trial, for example, who the judge is, what the jury might be made up of, and also to the attorney that you're talking, who you're being retained by, who opposing counsel may be, and what that type of relationship is. And there's many intangibles, I would say, that would be important to know, so that when you have questions or queries about something that might be of a legal nature, I think you go to your retaining attorney if it's issues related to the case. Now, if there are issues that come up, and sometimes they do, that are unrelated to the case, that might affect you as an expert witness, where it deals with practice management issues if you're self-employed, or that might affect you in your career in terms of your suffering potential reputational harm or something like that, just you as an expert witness in and of itself, then I think you need to direct those types of questions to your business attorney, because I think that is critical. And I think it's wise for every expert, especially vocational experts, to have that ability to have someone to have on hand to consult as necessary.
And that they can also be helpful for the retention agreement. Do you, like, that's also another thing I wanted to ask about. Do you provide a retention agreement to the attorney that you have drafted and vetted through an attorney yourself, or would attorneys provide their version and then you would review that? And like, what's the common practice?
Well, I think it runs the gamut. Okay. I have colleagues from all over the country, and you hear different practices. Some people don't use a retention agreement at all, or a contract. Some people do. I use a contract. I require a fee, like a retainer fee, and a contract. And I think it's good. I think it's a good business, but I think that again is an individual business decision that you have to make for your comfort level in your business. I think that's an individual choice. But have I seen colleagues not choose to? Absolutely. Some people just have, and they've done it, and they've had very successful practices. I just think it requires what your comfort level is. And I think it also sometimes is based on the area of the country, quite frankly. That's kind of interesting to me. Sometimes they do it on a handshake, and sometimes it's just, word of mouth, and sometimes you don't sign it and pay me, I'm not doing anything. So I think it runs the gamut. But for me personally, I think you need to send the contract, get it signed, get paid, and get moving.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so earlier we were talking about a presentation that you had done at one of the conferences called War Stories from the Courtroom. And you told me that after the presentation, now you're being invited back to do more similar presentations.
Yeah, so this is not a solo venture. Okay. I'm very honored to have my name associated with a colleague, Michelle Weiss. She's based out of Nashville. And this happened very organically. Michelle Weiss and I were sitting in a Denver airport, and we were getting ready to board a plane to go to a conference. I'm not quite sure. I don't remember where the destination was, but I just remember her and I think we were on a Southwest flight, and you can pick your own seats or something. And this was either back in 2019 or 2020 before COVID. So it was probably 19. And we were just chatting. I think it was like a late flight or something. And we were just talking and we were just swapping what I would describe as war stories. And we just happened to just come up with like an idea, like, oh, we should talk about this sometime. And that was really the genesis of this whole idea of this presentation. And we thought we would just do it once and be done. And we presented it, and then we were asked to come back, and we were very honored, and we did it again, and then we were asked again to come back. So we did multiple iterations of it, never really trying to do the same content. We tried to do different aspects of war stories. That's kind of like the how it's referenced. And we thought we were done. We've done it like every year since. And really, last year we thought we were done. We did it down in Virginia, Washington, in Crystal City for an organization. And we did 2 versions of it, or 2 sessions. And then someone came up to us afterwards and said, would you consider doing something that is geared towards like emerging professionals? So Michelle and I talked about it and we thought about it. So we submitted an RFP, a couple of RFPs, and we're actually going to be speaking in a few weeks in San Francisco. And then we're going to continue it at the annual conference. We're speaking at IARP in November and then at ABVE at the spring conference in March. So towards that same demographic. But yeah, so we're very excited. We never thought, we thought we were done. We thought we had everything we had to say. So, but it's very cool because I think the one thing that Michelle and I, and she's got almost as many years experience as I do. I think I might have her by like maybe a year or something. But she and I have realized that, and I think we inherently knew this, we never get done learning as she's like, I know that her and I do the same practice. Every time we testify, we call up that attorney that we've been retained by and we ask them, is there something we could have done differently? Do you have like a recommendation for us? Because we really are trying, because like, we're all works in progress, right? We want to be doing the best that we can in terms of advocating for our opinion. And really that's based on sound methodology. That's based on just kind of being consistent, putting together the most cohesive work product that we can within the confines of that methodology.
So do you think you can share maybe a war story with us today, like probably the toughest case you've worked on and what made it particularly challenging?
I don't know if I have like one case, but what I can say is that maybe there's a category. I think maybe traumatic brain injuries are very nuanced because traumatic brain injuries, and maybe where there's like a mental, physical component, because they're very multifaceted because it can affect so many different things. There is the physical component, and then from a TBI perspective, you have a cognitive impact, you have an emotional overlay, so you have the functional impact from a physical perspective in terms of how somebody can sit, stand, walk, crawl, carry, lift, from an occupational perspective, but also how it affects them in their everyday life. And then from a cognitive perspective, how they think, how they do executive function tasks, depending on what their job is in terms of how cognitively intense it is. And then and if there's any kind of like psychiatric or psychological overlay, but you also have pain that might be impacting that with either pain and then medication and how side effects can be impacting that person. So there is like that perfect storm potentially of this, congruency with all of these things. So to be able to tease out that, there's a lot of experts that would be giving opinions that a vocational expert will have to take into consideration. For example, maybe a physiatrist, physical medicine and rehabilitation expert, maybe a neurologist or an orthopedic physician, and maybe a neuropsychologist, maybe a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So you have like a lot of moving parts there, and you're looking for information that you can foundationally rely upon in order to give an expert opinion that is going to meet the standards or the criteria based on the jurisdiction that you're in. So I think there's a lot of areas that you have to be aware of. And you mentioned Rule 702, just briefly earlier. That has to be, we know the judge is the gatekeeper, so he's going to decide if you're in or out. And there's some language, I think, that is important for if you're going to choose to use a contract when you're being retained, that you make sure, at least I think it's at least worthy of consideration, that you don't just leave it up to the retaining attorney, that you actually have some input, that if there is a Daubert challenge to preclude or limit you, that you have some ability to review what is being presented in terms of what you're either anticipated to say or have said within the four corners of your report, because the judge is going to rule however he or she is going to rule. But that decision may follow you throughout the rest of your expert witness career. So every time, theoretically, that you testify, either through deposition in a discovery setting or at trial, either live or through video trial testimony, you're going to be explaining yourself. So you want to be able to at least tell your story to the judge so that when a decision is made, at least you have had the ability to give your perspective.
I think it's a great practice that is suggesting that you should have it in your retainer agreement that the attorney notifies you. In fact, recently it happened with an expert, and I actually interviewed him yesterday for one of our episodes for this season. And he did not know that in one of the cases, the judge decided to exclude his testimony. And it turned out that a retaining attorney had left the case because he had a falling out with the plaintiff. And then after the retaining attorney had left, the plaintiff just gave up on the case. And a month later, the defendant's attorney moved to exclude the expert. And there was nobody to defend that or argue against that motion. And the judge pretty much signed off on the proposed order submitted by the defendant's attorney. And that led to an exclusion. And then this expert was asked about it in a later deposition. And he didn't even know about it. So he was surprised.
Yeah. And, honestly, that can happen. I mean, I think you can be very diligent, right? As an expert, you can be keeping in contact. And I do recommend that you, to the best of your ability, you follow up on cases that are closed, where sometimes things hang out there. And especially with COVID, like things came to a grinding halt for a long time. And sometimes you don't know like what happened. And sometimes you just can't know. Like that expert may have been very diligent, and he just, unfortunately for him, it just happens. And even if you have something that's been ruled against you, it doesn't mean it's like a scarlet letter. It doesn't have to be a death knell. However, knowledge is power, and it gives you an opportunity to explain it, right? Because maybe there is a very reasonable explanation, but I guess my point is at least you try to get it. And if you can't, at least if you know about it, you can at least understand what happened and then take it from there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's what expert did. Once he found out, he eventually wrote to the judge, and the judge wrote back and said, and the judge wrote back and said that I unfortunately cannot overturn my decision because you're not a party to the case. But at no point did I question or doubt your credentials and your experience as an expert witness.
Well, I commend the judge. Was this a federal case? I'm just curious.
It was a federal case from the Northern District of Texas.
Okay, was this a lighting expert by any chance?
It was a transportation expert.
A transportation, okay.
Yeah. So let's moving on to the next question.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. What makes a smooth and productive relationship between an attorney and an expert witness? Like, what key elements do you think, make the process a breeze to work?
Well, I think the first one from a vocational expert perspective is accessibility. I think you want to, if at all possible, be available. Of course, within reason. If an attorney calls you, be available. My cell phone is on my website. My cell phone's on my business card. So call people back as soon as possible, respond to emails as soon as possible. Attorneys appreciate that. If you do have someone answer your phone, don't make them go through hoops to get to you. They will move on to the next expert, and you will not get that referral. And sometimes you can't take the referral. But I do think that accessibility is, very key. I also think it's important to, understand that if If someone is calling you, like if an attorney is calling you, they are trial attorneys and they are very busy individuals. So they want to get right to it. Make sure you have a form that you can quickly go through to ask key questions. Be able to tell them exactly what you need to run a conflicts check. For example, I start with what are the deadlines? And then I say exactly what I need to run a conflicts check. And then I send that to them, and then I go through my process of how to do that, like so that I can get back to them. I don't do it on the phone because I'm very methodical in terms of how I run that, because that is a very key thing. You don't want to be in a situation where there's after you've accepted a referral and find out later that there's a conflict. That's not a good thing. So you want to make sure that, at least that's my little practice tip maybe. But I think that, and then also communication. I think that is the biggest thing, is to communicate responsiveness, and just, if you say that you're going to do something, make sure you do it. And if you can't do something, own it, and then just explain why, and then just follow up. Do not ghost anyone. They're not going to appreciate that.
Yeah. And like you said, that you take feedback from your attorneys after every case.
I try to. I mean, like sometimes we can't connect. There's at least a concerted effort.
Yeah. So I think that's a great practice, and more experts should do that if they're not doing already. But I want to flip the question and ask you that, what feedback do you have for attorneys in general? And like, you don't have to name anybody, and it doesn't have to be specific. But given that we've had such a long career, what are a couple of things that you would want attorneys to do better when they work with experts?
Well, a lot of the things that I've learned, Ashish, I've kind of put into my contract. And and all of these things are not meant to sound like you don't want to be difficult. Do you know what I mean? And I've been very blessed in my practice. I like to think that I am busy. I am busy, but I also think I'm a very detailed expert. I will tell, when attorneys call me, and listen, there are my colleagues who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. They may have a different way to do things, and I respect that totally. I think it's just that you have to, like when I said, you have to know the kind of expert that you are, so that the attorney that you are working, that you're being retained by, they need to understand the boundaries that you're working in, because you have to guard your reputation. So all of it stems from that perspective. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of where it emanates from. So some of the things that may seem like common sense, but not really, because there are some experts that will say, I'm really glad that I got this call, and I'm going to do anything I can to keep that business. And the attorney will say, I'll send you 10 cases. And I would say very respectfully, no, please do not do that, because I'm not going to agree to that. This is like a N of one. We're going to take one at a time, because first of all, I'm just me. It's just me in my business, right? I don't have that bandwidth, and that's by choice. But I think that each case is unique, and you have to work from that platform. And I just am very detailed. So it's important for me to drill down, and the information that I'm getting is such that is how my contract is structured, if that makes sense. And I do tell attorneys, if you're looking for that 30,000 foot view, I'm not your expert. And I tell them that in my initial phone call. And I'm comfortable saying that because, and that's another point, I guess, which kind of aligns with what you're asking here. Not every expert, in my opinion, is the right expert for every case. You have to recognize that. I just think it's an appreciation for doing the best service that you can within the confines of understanding that you're not trying to, quote unquote, please anyone. You're trying to stay within a very structured, you're trying to adhering to an expert witness protocol that identifies a methodology, how you got your opinion, how your opinion was formed, and that you want to be able to defend that in front of a jury and in front of a judge.
So 35 years into the profession. And obviously, it must have evolved a lot, and you must have seen the trends changing, the way the evaluations have been are being carried out, the standards. I'm sure like there have been some changes there with time. So, what are the biggest changes that you've seen in terms of practices, tools, or maybe even technology?
Well, I think things have changed, and I think COVID was a groundbreaker. I think there was a paradigm shift for,
Hmm.
I think globally that was a paradigm shift, right? No one
Yeah.
expected that. A lot of people, a lot of my colleagues have transitioned to like Zoom or Teams to, do distance evaluations. Some vocational experts use testing, some do not. There's different ways to approach different areas of methodology, things of that nature. And there's different areas of practice within being a vocational expert. Some people do life care planning, some do economic evaluations, as part of their work as a vocational expert. There is Social Security vocational expert work. Some do transition services, some do areas with career counseling, that's a little bit
Hmm.
more direct services. But there, among other things like longshoremen, long-term disability. So there's very many things, and all of those, and some of those have been around for a long time. But what I'm saying is that there have been advancements within each
Hmm.
of those areas of, I guess, specialization is how I would refer to it as. And AI has started to make an impact.
Wow.
And that is certainly something that is, I think, going to affect all of us, right?
Mhm.
That is impactful every day. I think it's changing and things like that. I think we have to recognize that it is um, something that is a tool. I think there's been a lot of discussion, and there's a lot of organizations that they're rewriting their ethical standards or
Yeah.
including it in their, standards of practice and how to make, how it impacts ethical decisions and into their ethical decision based making models and things of that nature.
Mhm.
Um, and I even think some of it has been factored into, and there's some research studies that I'm aware that are going on into how it has been and how it will be either short term or based on longitudinal studies that are presently being in place, how it's going to affect things like career trajectories, human resource professionals, career counselors, whether it's going to replace people, even in the world of jobs like
Yeah.
mechanization. I think there was just a longshore strike that was, I think they came to a temporary agreement, but they're going to renegotiate or look at this again in January of 25. That was part of it. Like they do not want any type of automation as part of that. If I understood what I heard, a news report about that, and that kind of goes to that a little bit from what you've asked in that question. So I think it has a profound area or impact potentially. So that's kind of a few of the things. I mean, I just think that we all just need to keep as current as possible. And I don't think we can be afraid of it. I think that's like the one thing. I think whatever is coming, I think if we stick our head in the sand, so to speak, that's when that's not a good thing. I think to me, it's better to just face something, become as educated as possible, and then make the most intelligent decisions that you can with what you know in time, but
Mhm.
be flexible in that paradigm or in that like space to see how it impacts you, and then just kind of pivot and respond based on how things might be necessary.
And are there areas that you believe need more attention or innovation where you may feel that, okay, this should have moved and gotten better? Like, is there something you can think of on those lines?
In terms of vocational
Yeah.
rehabilitation
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
expert witness work.
I mean, both actually. I mean,
I think it's changing. I mean, Social Security vocational expert work was just recently impacted. Now, I don't do Social Security vocational expert work, but there was just some significant changes by the Social Security Administration that has some profound changes for how vocational experts are used for that entity in terms of how administrative law judges determine disability
Mhm.
cases. So ALJs or administrative law judges are now looking at a different criteria. That was as of June of this year. So that has been like a changing landscape. So vocational experts who do that type of work are going to have to be aware. And I think that's the other thing. It's like you need to keep current through governmental legislative updates. So it is important, I think, to have some connection with a professional organization or take it upon yourself if you choose not to do that, to at least stay plugged in to know what's going on in the landscape nationally with regard to the area of expertise or the area of practice that you are kind of looking to either break into or where you practice, so that what you need to be cognizant of, so that you are kind of practicing ethically and that you know what you're doing.
So before we wrap up, and you've already given advice for new experts and one key advice was to get the certifications and the credentials. So is there any other advice for new experts who want to get into vocational expert work or
Um,
rehabilitation work?
Yeah, I do think that it's important for experts to get involved. I think that it's extremely relevant to just put yourself out there. Go to conferences if you can. I get it when you're first starting out, it might be tight financially. If you're working for a company, advocate to try to see if an employer will sponsor you to go. Make a case for why it's important to stay relevant, because I think that's the key. Start to maybe make some connections with other vocational experts. We're a friendly lot. We're opinionated, but because we get paid for our opinions, we can, I think people want to be helpful. People want to give back. At least that's my experience with colleagues for many years. And I think people really do want to help each other. And I do think that it's different, like in the sense that there is a value that we bring to the world of expert witness work and to attorneys. I mean, they need us in the sense that there's a skill set that we bring, just like any other expert that they may employ. There is a reason that they're seeking our opinion. We're kind of like a piece of the puzzle. Like, we're not the whole enchilada, so to speak, right? But we have to realize that we are just a piece of the puzzle. And I guess the other piece of advice that I would give, like for new experts, and also I think whether you're a rising professional or you're a seasoned expert or you're somewhere in mid-career, is the message, I think, is that it aligns with what you said yesterday, which I listened to, which I think commemorated World Mental Health Day, if I remember correctly, is the idea of self-care. That is kind of like my personal mantra that has kind of evolved over time for me, but it is the ability to take care of yourself, however that looks. If it is taking time away, or if it is doing something for you, whether it's 5 minutes a day, or if it's just a routine of something. Because I think if you can recharge your batteries, however that looks for you, if it's daily, weekly, monthly, if it's a date night, or if it's taking yourself out to dinner, a girlfriend night out, however it looks, or it's time with your dog. I have two of them, so sometimes I cuddle. Sometimes my husband he's off doing something else. I'm just happy to spend some time with my two puppies. Whatever it is, it's an opportunity, because then it makes you a better person, not just professionally, but on every level, human level, whatever it is, like, emotionally, psychologically, physically. You can just bring your best every day. And then the attorneys who hire you and the rest of the areas of the people in your life and yourself, everyone's just going to benefit. So that's probably what I would end with.
Well, I think that's great advice. So thank you, Maria. Thank you so much for your time today. You were everything I had hoped for and more. And my last question is, if a listener wants to reach out to you, be it an attorney or a new expert who wants like some advice, where can they find you?
Well, first of all, Ashish, I want to thank you. It has been so much fun talking to you. I am so humbled that you asked me to participate in this podcast. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Mine.
And so thank you. So if anyone wants to reach out, I am happy to discuss anything with a vocational expert or an attorney. They can go to my website, www.signaturerehab.com, or they can just shoot me an email, which is maria.babinetz@signaturerehab.com. And please reach out, and I'm happy to speak to anybody. So again, thank you so much, Ashish.
Thank you so much, Maria. And I hope to speak to you soon.
You as well.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. If you found this podcast useful, remember to subscribe and give us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. This will help other users find this podcast and benefit from the insights shared by our guests. If you'd like to be featured as a guest on this show, please write to media@xlightum.com. See you in the next episode. Having shared her knowledge with peers through presentations like War Stories from the Courtroom, we are excited to dive into her journey today and hear the lessons she's learned along the way.